The Denver Broncos have fired their head coach, Vic Fangio. He was in Denver for 3 years. He went 19-30 in that time. Year 1, he went 7-9. Year 2, he went 5-11. And then this year, he went 7-10. The last 2 years, the Broncos were last in the AFC West. Vic Fangio actually makes me nervous for anyone hiring defensive coaches because his teams always had a ton of talent, and he just never could develop a quarterback. He had Drew Lock, this young quarterback, who he couldn't develop a quarterback. He also couldn't get a quarterback. They tried Teddy Bridgewater. They tried Case Keenum. They did everything they could in Denver to get a quarterback. It never worked. And Drew Lock, their young guy, just never developed. And I think part of that's because he's not an offensive-minded coach who's good at developing young quarterbacks. He's a defensive-minded coach. And Fangio even seemed to hate Drew Lock and kind of totally write him off this year. Like I felt like Drew Lock didn't get as many opportunities as he probably should have, given how desperate the Broncos were for a starting quarterback. Vic Fangio is a classic example of a coach who, in my opinion, was a great coordinator that maybe should have never been a head coach. And there's a couple quotes I'll share that will show that. Although I got to say, I still cannot believe that the Denver Broncos passed on Justin Fields in the NFL draft last year. Like, all you're going to hear in coverage about the Denver Broncos is, well, Vic Fangio, good coach who never got a quarterback. But why did they never get a quarterback? Why did they not draft Justin Fields, a young quarterback out of Ohio State last year? They passed on him. And Justin Fields was not amazing in his rookie year. Let's be clear about that. But he also had Matt Nagy coaching him, the Bears offense, and a mess there in Chicago, and he's a rookie. But if Vic Fangio and it wasn't him that drafted him, the GM drafted him, but if they drafted Justin Fields in Denver, maybe Vic Fangio would still have a job, because then you could argue, well, we got a young quarterback, we're developing him. We went 7-10, but we're only a couple games away from 10-7, and let's see what the young quarterback can do. But because they were stagnant at quarterback, they didn't make a move. There is no hope. There's nothing they're building towards. And it's crazy to me. Now, Vic Fangio gave 2 quotes after losing to Kansas City on Sunday I want to highlight. One question, he was asked what separates the Broncos from the rest of the AFC West. And Fangio said, those other 3 teams, the Raiders, the Chargers, Kansas City, they all have 3 top-shelf quarterbacks, which is obvious to everyone. And, well, that's totally true, by the way. What he said there isn't wrong. He's like, look, they got Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Derek Carr. We got Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Lock. Like, come on. Of course, we're not going to beat them when we don't have what it takes to win a game, which is a lot of games, which is a starting quarterback who's really good. And while it's true, you probably shouldn't say that, because all it sounds like and all that people hear is you throwing your team under the bus. So I feel like Vic Fangio was too honest there, and that's the words of a man who is resigned to the fact he knows he's going to get fired. The other angle, though, is that maybe, just maybe, he probably was just trying to save face, but maybe he was also in that moment recruiting Aaron Rodgers, saying, look, if I can keep my job here and we can get Aaron Rodgers next year, Mr. Vic Fangio, I'm going to win a lot of games in Denver with Aaron Rodgers as my starting quarterback. And so maybe, I don't think so. I think it was him saving face, but it's possible. In his head, when he said that, he thought he was recruiting someone like Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson to come to Denver and be his franchise quarterback. Now, another quote he gave, he said, if they run me out of here, I'll find work in the NFL without any trouble. And I saw a lot of Broncos fans saying that this is a very arrogant quote from Vic Fangio. Maybe, and this is why I would argue, maybe he should not have been a head coach. He's a guy who sounds very he's in preservation mode, worrying about himself more than about his team around him. And that's not exactly a trait I would want for my head coach, which is a guy who's selfish. I wouldn't want to describe my head coach as someone who is selfish. That's not something I'm comfortable with. I want my coach to be team first. However, is he wrong? Vic Fangio is going to be a defensive coordinator somewhere next year in the NFL without any problem. Without any problem. He's beloved. He was amazing. Why did Matt Nagy once win NFL Coach of the Year? A lot of people argue because Vic Fangio was his defensive coordinator. Vic Fangio's a defensive genius, and I think that somebody's going to hire him to be their defensive coordinator this year and do very good stuff. And I'm excited to see that because he's now a free agent. He's available. And was he a good head coach? Not really. Is he a great defensive mind who's really good as a defensive coordinator? Absolutely. And keep your eye on where Vic Fangio goes next year in the NFL.